Akinton stood tall, his military uniform crisp and his boots shining under the blazing sun of the camp's parade ground. He was the soldier in charge of corps members' safety, and he took his job seriously. With a stern face, he watched as the corps members shuffled around, clearly intimidated by his presence. He had been posted to this NYSC orientation camp a week ago, and already, he had earned a reputation for being tough, no-nonsense, and utterly unapproachable. His orders were clear: no corps member was to leave the camp without permission, and discipline must be maintained at all costs. Most of the corps members complied without question, their eyes wide with fear every time they passed him. But not Layla. From the moment she stepped into the camp, she had been different. Unlike the others who would lower their heads and avoid his gaze, Layla walked with confidence. Her sharp tongue had already earned her attention, but she seemed undeterred. Layla had never been one to back down from authority, especially when it came to people throwing their weight around. The moment she saw Akinton backing orders like he owned the camp, something inside her stirred. She wasn't intimidated. She believed in speaking up for herself, and if that meant clashing with the military officer, so be it. Their first encounter was inevitable. She had forgotten her camp pass and was about to head out when Akinton blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going without authorization?" he asked in a deep, commanding voice. Layla met his gaze squarely. "I'm just stepping out to get something important," she replied, her voice firm. "I'll be back in no time." Akinton was not amused. "You know the rules, corps member. No pass, no exit." But Layla wasn't about to let it slide. "Rules or no rules, you don't have to shout. I'm not one of your soldiers." Akinton had met many stubborn corps members in his time, but there was something about Layla that struck a nerve. She wasn't just defying him, she was challenging him openly, and he didn't like that. "You're out of line," he said, his voice low but laced with authority. "You will respect the rules, or there will be consequences." But Layla wasn't backing down. "Respect goes both ways, officer," she shot back. For the first time in years, Akinton felt a flicker of emotion other than anger. He didn't know what to make of it, but Layla's defiance was intriguing. There was a fire in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. He wasn't sure if he admired her or if he was simply annoyed. One thing was clear: Layla wasn't like the others, and dealing with her would require more than the usual show of force. As the days went by, tension between Akinton and Layla continued to escalate. Every time they crossed paths, it was a battle of wills. The other corps members watched in awe as Layla boldly confronted the officer without a second thought. Some admired her bravery, others thought she was foolish. But Layla didn't care what they thought. She had never been one to follow the crowd. Akinton, on the other hand, found himself growing increasingly frustrated. No matter how hard he tried, Layla always seemed to find a way to push his buttons. He had never met a woman like her, so fearless, so unapologetic. He wanted to put her in her place, but at the same time, he couldn't help but respect her courage. It was a strange feeling for him, one that left him confused. One evening, the camp was hit by a sudden storm. The rain poured down in sheets, and the wind howled through the buildings. Most of the corps members took shelter in their hostels, but Layla was nowhere to be found. Akinton's first instinct was to assume she had defied orders and left the camp without permission. His blood boiled at the thought of her recklessness. But as the storm raged on, worry crept into his mind. What if something had happened to her? Against his better judgment, Akinton grabbed a raincoat and set out into the storm to find her. As he trudged through the muddy campgrounds, his mind raced with thoughts. Why was he doing this? Why did he care so much about finding her? Akinton found Layla huddled under a small shed near the camp's boundary. She was soaked to the bone, shivering from the cold, but her eyes were still defiant. "What are you doing out here?" he shouted over the sound of the rain. "I could ask you the same thing," Layla replied, her voice steadied despite the situation. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the cold taking its toll on her. Despite his anger, Akinton felt a pang of concern. Without a word, he removed his raincoat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Layla blinked in surprise but didn't argue. For the first time since they met, there was no argument between them. Just silence as they stood together in the rain. The next day, Layla approached Akinton with a different demeanor. "Thanks for last night," she said, her tone softer than usual. Akinton nodded but remained quiet. Something had shifted between them in the storm, something neither of them could quite define. There was still tension, but it wasn't the same. They didn't speak of the night again, but from that moment on, the way they interacted changed. Layla was still fiery, and Akinton still maintained his stern exterior, but there was a mutual respect that hadn't been there before. The other core members noticed it too, whispering about the unlikely bond that seemed to be forming between the two. As the weeks passed, Layla and Akinton found themselves crossing paths more often, but now their encounters were less confrontational. They spoke briefly during camp activities, their words laced with a newfound ease. Akinton still maintained his authority, and Layla still questioned him, but there was a lightness to their interactions that hadn't been there before. Akinton couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and he found himself looking forward to their conversations, even when they clashed. Layla, on the other hand, was beginning to see a different side of the rugged soldier. Beneath his tough exterior, there was a man who cared deeply about his duty, even if he didn't always show it.